Hello, this is History 101, Understanding 19th Century America. One of the things I like to talk about with my students is to help them understand 19th century America and come up with a way to understand the century. Our current age, the early 21st century, you might say has a big problem with the 19th century. To the point of it's pretty elevated in the emotional state. And so to help us understand the 19th century, I like to talk a little bit about 19th century culture and the development of American culture and the definition of what an American is. As the lecture you're studying right now, lecture 12, Development of American Nationalism, you're learning that in the early 19th century, you have this group of people in eastern North America, formerly British colonies. They have their own country now. But they don't consider themselves, they're not English, they're not European anymore. And so you have in the early 19th century a conscious, deliberate effort to develop this idea of what an American is. How is an American different than a European? What's the definition? What are some ideas there? And in the early 19th century, when you study early 19th century American culture, in general, the culture developed this idea that an American is someone from Northern and Western Europe, specifically English. Hope it saves. We'll find out. Well, the History 101, Understanding 19th Century America. This is part of Lecture 12, Expressions of American Nationalism. One thing I like to review with my students is go over a couple of ideas that will help students understand the 19th century American culture. In the early 21st century, students in my career tends to have a problem with the 19th century, and so we need to ask ourselves, and I'm going to review kind of what are some things that will help us understand 19th century American culture. Number one, the definition of culture. You have in the early 19th century a culture, a society, largely European, with English as the predominant ethnic group. And so, that you have this culture, this society. They've had a war with their mother country, England, Great Britain, and they've started their own country. But, it's like, well, we're our own country, what are we? Well, we're not British. We're not European. Many of these colonial Americans now, new society have never been to Europe. And so in the early 19th century, you see this development of this idea of American culture. What is an American? In 19th century America, the definition developed the box or the target. The box that developed was Northern and Western European, specifically English, but definitely Northern and Western European, and Protestant. And so you have in the early 19th century, over the years of the 19th century, you have the predominant culture being Northern and Western European, and more specifically English, and then religiously Protestant Christian. And so that's going to be the culture that develops. And that leads to the second idea that will help us understand the 19th century. In the 19th century American culture, generally how you were treated, generally how you were viewed, generally how you were treated was how close you got or how well you could assimilate. That's the key word, assimilate. How close to that target can you get? How close to that box or that target can you get? Or that strike zone, to use a sports metaphor. You know what? How close to the strike zone can you get? How close to being Northern and Western European generally, and then specifically English, and then Protestant Christian. And so when you study 19th century American, you go, well, why did they do this? Why was this? Why was that? You know, and when you understand this idea that the society has created a definition of what an American is, based on geography, Northern Western European, and ethnic group, English, and then you have it developed also religiously, Protestant Christian. How well you're treated is going to be kind of how well you can hit that strike zone. So somebody of English descent is going to be fine. My first ancestors to the United States or to colonial America were Puritan, Massachusetts Puritans who came to Massachusetts in the as early as the 1660s, and so that group, you have English people, Protestants, English people are going to be well accepted. That's the predominant culture, right? And so when you look at other groups and you go, why were they treated like that? Why is this? Why is that? Well, how well could they hit that target? So, for example, you go, Mr. Bill's Irish people weren't very highly thought of in the 19th century. They're Western European, but what's the problem? They're Catholic. And so they're not Protestant Christian, they're Catholic. And then, if you remember, going back to lecture 3, when we talked about the development of the southern colonies, before England or Great Britain started settling the New World, setting up the British North American colonies, where did they colonize or settle? Ireland, right? So the 1670s, the 1570s, wrong century. The 1570s, before you get to the 1600s, you have British landowners, British settlers coming to Ireland and taking over possession of the land and ownership of the land, displacing native Irish people. And so in that context, you have the general English cultures going, well, Irish people are second class, or less than, they're colonists. They're the labor. And so that's why when you get to the 19th century, not only are they're Catholic, these Irish people are, since the 50s, 70s, England has, politically taken over, economically taken over Ireland, right, and taken over the land, and so Irish people no longer landowners; they work the land, so you kind of get demoted in status. You look at other groups. We go, the African American or black population. Well, they're the labor class. They're not Northern Western European, and then there is efforts to convert the first African Americans, the first Africans that came to the American colonies were either a local Native American, local Native African tribe, or even Muslim, and so you'll convert them to Christianity, but that doesn't, that's only part of the box, right? And so you have this gradation, kind of the degrees here, where how well you're treated is kind of how close can you get. Hispanic people, well, they're European. They're European by descent, partially, but again, they're largely Catholic, so you don't fit that Protestant box. You take off the European part, partially European descent, Spanish, and so you kind of just go down those groups. I'll give you one example. It's outside of our class. It's a History 102 topic. It's a History 102 topic, but it highlights this idea of assimilation. 19th century Americans have created this target, strike zone or box or definition, and how well you're treated is how close you can get to that box. In 1883, the U.S. Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, excluding Chinese immigration to the United States. And so that's an example of, well, what has Congress done? Congress has, the larger culture, the predominant culture, has looked at the Chinese population and said, what? They're not assimilatable. They cannot be assimilated. In other words, they cannot be American. So you exclude them from immigration, the Chinese Exclusion Act. And so, again, you're like, why isn't there an Irish Exclusion Act? Well, because they're at least European. They're European, right? Western European. So you look at the different groups of people that live in America or come to America, and for Chinese individuals, the Chinese Exclusion Act highlighted this idea that, well, if you've defined Chinese immigrants as unassimilatable, they cannot become American, and so you exclude them from immigration. So that's kind of an example. You get to how accepted are you? Kind of depends on how American can you be. All right, and so hopefully that'll help you have some understanding of the 19th century and the culture.